Cover Killer Nation, a big day has arrived. It's time for us to talk about an album that's been extremely anticipated for 14 years, and finally it's happening. It's to be released this Tuesday, February the 7th. It is a different kind of truth. It is Van Halen. This is part of a THREEVIEW along with two other members of the album review community. I am CountCronos and KHFan4ever, and I'm Cover Killer Nation. Now, whenever I heard that this album was coming out, two feelings got into my mind. Two feelings, polar opposites, but they got into my mind, crept into my mind. First one, anticipation, jubilation, happiness. Why? Because it's a new Van Halen album. Van Halen is and was one of the biggest bands of the late 1970s, 1980s. I mean, this is a band that was a cash cow. They did very, very well, not to mention all their singles were really, really big winners with the David Lee Roth era. This is an original, well, not really an original lineup here in 2012. It is 3 Van Halens and 1 David Lee Roth. However, the David Lee Roth era was huge. Sammy Hagar era, not so much. But this is David Lee Roth back with the band, and this is their first new album of material with David Lee Roth since 1984. This is a long time coming, and there's been a lot of bad blood between this band that they've been able to set aside. Second feeling though, I have to admit this, second feeling, fear. Fucking fear. Why? Because of 2 words that I'm going to say right now. Chinese democracy. I'll make it 3 words. Chinese, fuck you democracy. And fuck you is 1 word, not 2. Because it's combined together. Because whenever I listen to Chinese Democracy, the first album of new material by Guns N' Roses, in a lengthy period of time, it was just balls. It fucking sucked. And I immediately thought to myself, bands that take these long periods of time, that have these overly anticipated albums, are just going to always fall short. Because the anticipation and all of the hype surrounding them destroys them. So a different kind of truth comes out, and I finally get my opportunity to listen to it, and it's now time for me to inflect my feelings on this album to you, and I, of course, did so with the track Tattoo about a month ago, and I was really happy with what I heard from Tattoo. But, of course, I was also really happy whenever I heard the song Better by Guns N' Roses, and then the rest of the album was just balls. So what happened with this album? Well, I'm going to tell you something first off before I even get into this, and that's the fact that Van Halen was very intelligent with this album. They went back to the old school vault. They went back to the 1970s, and they found a bunch of old lyrics, old songs, and things like that that they never really made the albums. They were just things that they had kind of mulling around the vault a little bit, and they reworked them. They finished them. They, put music to things that were just lyrics. They put, lyrics to things that were just music. They, they really reworked these things really nicely, and they were able to slap them together and onto this album. So while this is their first album of new material since 1998, it also kind of isn't new material, but it's stuff that never saw the light of day. So you can almost see this as really turning back the clock in a really nice way. And this album actually shines very nicely. There's something that can be said about David Lee Roth. There's something that really can be said about David Lee Roth and Eddie Van Halen. Listen, the two might fucking hate each other. The two might have been absolute polar opposites. They might have made the rivalry between Noel and Liam Gallagher of Oasis look like a fucking, shovey-dovey match in the first fucking grade. But whenever it comes to the music, whenever it comes to getting together in a studio, magic seems to happen. It doesn't matter how lame sometimes David Lee Roth's lyrics can really seem. It doesn't matter how deadpan sometimes it can be delivered, which is barely. And it doesn't matter how often you just think to yourself, well, David is just a horny motherfucker. That's all that he is. He's just a guy who wants to fuck and drink and party and rock and roll. That's a lot of ands. But for some strange reason, whenever you combine David Lee Roth with the Van Halens, whenever you combine him now with Wolfgang Van Halen, the new bassist, magic happens. I don't know how it happens. It's one of these weird, strange phenomenons of life. David Lee Roth, Eddie Van Halen, Alex Van Halen, Wolfgang Van Halen. Great album. This is a good album. And the real signature way in which I could tell is because Tattoo was a song where it wasn't just kind of barely okay, it was convincingly good. Whenever you have a song that's convincingly good to really start off an album, not something that you kind of have to shake your head a little bit and kind of determine it, that's how you can tell that there's something on here. There's some sort of magic, some sort of mystery going on here that is just going to grip you. And this is an album that does so. Now, is every song a killer? No, every song is not a killer. Tattoo is one of the stronger songs on this album. It's not necessarily that this is filled with rip-roaring tunes that Tattoo is able to complement. Instead, this is an album that is really kind of highlighted by its accents. There's certain songs on here that really accent and bring up the ones that are maybe a little bit weaker. There's some tracks on here that just seem kind of, they don't know where they're going. And perhaps that's something that really shows forth the 1970s old-style vault philosophy not really being such a good philosophy, because sometimes there's some ideas that just kind of deserve to be buried and never heard, either that or maybe never formulated completely, because, you know, sometimes David Lee Roth sounds a little bit rushed. Either that or he's really trying to pack in way too much. Sometimes Eddie Van Halen really has to just, you know, soar on a solo just to try to make a song sound, you know, viable or worth listening to, and sometimes it just doesn't work. But there are a lot of times whenever you listen to the songs in this album where perhaps David Lee Roth's lyrics aren't exactly the best, and you have to kind of just sit there and scratch your head a little bit, where Eddie Van Halen just comes out and starts shredding, and you just become mesmerized. That's another thing that Van Halen really has to their advantage, is that Eddie is, even though he is a little bit conceited, he is a motherfucking guitar god. You can never ever deny that, because Eddie is just a guy that is able to, you throw a guitar into his hand and shred. And it's funny that, you know, you even look at this, because he was originally going to play drums, and Alex was originally going to play guitar, and they ended up flip-flopping, and I think it worked out kind of well. What do you say? But A Different Kind of Truth is going to be one of these albums that it's not necessarily going to be the top of the top in their catalog. It's not necessarily going to be the best album that you ever hear from Van Halen. However, whenever it comes to a return to form, whenever it comes to just a return album in general, where you had an album like Chinese Democracy by Guns N' Roses that really fell like way short of expectations, A Different Kind of Truth is a really, really great album by comparison. If you want to put it only by itself, it really is not bad at all. In fact, this is a pretty damn good album. I would give this one a solid 7.5. Why? Because listening to Van Halen in 2012 almost doesn't seem right. It almost doesn't seem like it should be possible. But it's happening, because the guys are back together. David Lee Roth is back with the Van Halens. And honestly, for an old guy like me, for a guy that's pushing 30, for a guy that hasn't exactly ever been around for like a legitimate Van Halen release with David Lee Roth, you know, coming out, you know, aside from being like, you know, all of like 6 inches tall, you know, this is a really nice moment for me. This is like rock history that I never thought I would get to see, that I'm getting to see. And I am even more pleased that I'm going to be selling the album on Tuesday, you know, as part of my job. That way I could see what kind of whirlwind that this is going to cause. I mean, it's not going to be the same thing as the late 70s, early 80s, but I still am really geared for the experience. It's great. And this is an album that's definitely worthy of it. You know, like with Chinese Democracy, once again, I know I'm going back to that a lot. This was something that was an exclusive to only some stores. Big fucking mistake. However, at the same time, Axl did us a favor. He didn't expose all of us to his piece of shit album. If you really wanted a piece of shit album, you really had to go out of your fucking way. With A Different Kind of Truth, this is going to be everywhere. This is going to be something that people can pick up in, you know, gregarious locations, anywhere. And this is where David Lee Roth and the boys were able to make a great album based around old material and make the band and make these songs sound new. Great job by the guys. Great job. Like I said, this is an album that is solid, and it definitely shows. And all the fear that I had has disappeared. This is an album that I'll probably be listening to a couple more times, because it's just a lot of fun, and I'll probably pop it in at work, because it's Van Halen. Come on, you gotta do that. So yes, definitely check out the other two members of the THREEVIEW. They are going to have their own take on this opinion and on this album. And I will talk to you guys later. Van Halen's fucking back, guys. I'm a little starstruck. This is great.